Hello and welcome to another episode of Testing Out Tools. In this episode, we're going to be looking at a tool called Arc by Heptio that promises to back up and manage your Kubernetes clusters. So, when you're using Kubernetes, usually you define all your resources in a YAML file, and you deploy that YAML file to your cluster and you create those resources. So this is using a declarative syntax. So you basically tell Kubernetes what you want it to create, and it goes ahead and creates it. Now, when you have one or two services, it's pretty easy to kind of reason about how many YAMLs you have and the state of those services. But when you have a production cluster with multiple services, multiple deployments, multiple persistent disks, things like that, getting the current state of the system can be quite difficult, right? If you want to create a copy of your production environment, if you want to spin up like a staging environment or a test environment, things like that, it'll get pretty difficult pretty quickly, even if you have all the YAMLs, right? Because you might have the latest version of this YAML, an older version of that YAML, maybe someone made a change in production on the fly to something else. And the other thing is, you don't have a snapshot of what it is at a particular time, right? So even if you have all your YAMLs checked into Git and you're taking these and you're deploying it correctly, you know, different teams might deploy at different times. And if you want to roll back to a specific point in your Kubernetes cluster, it becomes kind of difficult. So Heptio made a tool called Arc, and to my knowledge, what it tries to do is take a snapshot of your cluster as it's currently running, and then save that as like a big configuration file. And so you can spin up another cluster with the exact same configuration, right? And the cool thing is they also claim to back up your persistent disks. So all the data on your disks will be snapshotted and kept safe as well. So if you're using something like a database running on Kubernetes, you can also take a snapshot of your database. So it seems pretty cool, so let's take a look at how it works. So here we are at the Arc GitHub page, and as you can see, Arc is a utility for managing disaster recovery, specifically for Kubernetes resources. Great. So the Arc tool gives you backup and restore to your Kubernetes cluster resources and persistent volumes. So you can take backups of your cluster and restore in case of a loss. You can also replicate your production environment for development and testing. And then copy cluster resources across cloud providers, but the volumes are not supported yet. So it consists of a server that runs on your cluster and then a command line client. Okay, cool. So it looks like that's basically here. So let's go to the documentation, see how we can get started. Okay, so I'm going to run on Google Cloud. So let's look at the getting started first. So prerequisites. Kubernetes cluster, we have that. DNS server on the cluster, have that too. And kubectl installed. Perfect. So let us install Arc. Could not read from the repository. Okay. Let's use HTTP cloning instead. Did not expect that. I think my Cloud Shell isn't set up with my keys. It's interesting that it lets you have to, clone the repo to get started. That's kind of interesting. Okay, start server and local storage service in the root directory of the Arc. Run this. Okay. So it's using Minio. Well, I don't really want to use Minio. So Minio is basically a Amazon S3 thing that kind of runs right here, using Minio. I want to do a cloud provider, so maybe this is wrong. So let's go run on GCP instead. Okay, so you still needed to do the clone, so we didn't waste any time. So the first thing is we create a bucket. Okay, so it says use the gsutil command. I'm just going to make a bucket in the GUI. I like that better. Let's see. So let me just look up storage here. All right. And let's create a bucket. Let's make it a regional bucket. Save it in US West and call it Arc test bucket or So let's create that. Awesome. So now we have this bucket. Let's see what the next step is. Create a service account. Cool. So I'm assuming it'll use this service account to basically authenticate to the bucket and save, this config file that it'll create to that bucket. Okay, so now let's see if the thing is saved or created. Should be fine. Arc, perfect. Okay, cool. The next step is to set the service account email to match the email value. Okay. I'm not sure why they didn't just give you a command to do that automatically. That's okay. It's right here. Should work. Okay, cool. Let's just echo that to make sure that it is set. Okay, awesome. Okay, so attach policies to give Hectia Arc the necessary permissions. Okay, so we also need to set the bucket. That makes sense. Again, not sure why this is multiple steps, but that's okay. So the bucket, we called it Sandeep Arc Test Bucket. So let's pick that up, put it in here. Role permissions. Okay, so another environment variable that we're setting. I should just do something to make this a little bit easier to set up on Google Cloud. Okay, so we're going to create an IAM role and basically give it that. So it looks like we're also using project ID here. That wasn't set before. It's a good catch. So let's make sure that's also set. I think in Cloud Shell we should be okay, but no, we're not. Okay, so we need to set our project ID as well. It's a step that the documentation did not specify. Okay. You could also leave the project ID out. Okay, so let's run this command now. Okay, cool. So we have created a IAM role with those permissions, and now we basically have to give that service account that role. Here we go. Add IAM policy. Cool. So yeah, I'll probably send a PR to the Arc project just to kind of clean up this documentation a little bit. It's pretty straightforward if you've used Google Cloud before. Okay, so let's do this. So now we're also giving the service account access to the bucket that we created. Okay, so let's look at these permissions real fast. Most of them are about compute engine disks. So create snapshots, get snapshots, and then get the project. So I'm assuming it's going to be using a lot of these permissions to make backups of the persistent disk. I'm assuming that all the Kubernetes stuff is going to be done in cluster, so it doesn't really need Google Cloud permissions. But for the disks themselves, it's going to need permission to make snapshots of those disks. Okay, create a service account key specifying the output file in your local directory. Okay, so we're going to basically create a JSON key so we can use this service account. And there it is. So let's just cat that file. All right, cool. Don't worry, I will delete this file before I post it on the interweb, so don't even try to copy paste this or type in every character because it's not going to work. Okay, so if we're running on GKE, make sure that your current IAM user is a cluster admin. Yep, I am. This role is required to create RBAC objects. So basically that means you have to, well, we can do it right here. So we go in here, and we basically had to create a cluster role binding using our current user. Okay, so wait for this to finish. it'll basically create the RBAC permissions for my user to start doing stuff in the cluster. All right, cool. Okay, so in the Arc root directory, run the following thing to set up the namespaces, RBAC, and other scaffolding. Okay, cool. So let's run this command. Okay, so it created a few CRDs, and a namespace, and a service account, and a cluster role binding. Okay, so it created a CRD called backup, a CRD called schedules, restores, configs, download requests, delete backup requests, and some other stuff. So that all makes sense. I like CRDs, they make a lot of sense to use. Okay, create a secret. In the directory of the credentials file you just created, run this thing. Okay, interesting. Never seen namespace defined like that, but that's fine. All right, so here's my Arc credentials file. Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. So that namespace is clearly wrong. Let's go kubectl get namespaces. There it is. It's called heptio arc. Again, kind of weird that I didn't do that. Okay, so heptio arc. Okay, secret cloud credentials created. Okay, cool. Seems like the documentation really assumes you know a lot about Kubernetes, which kind of makes sense if you're using something like Arc. Okay, in the file arc config, replace your bucket. Okay. If you run the Nginx example, well, I'm not going to do that, I don't think. So let's just go and fix this file. So we're in Arc, and let's vim that file. Okay, so bucket right here. Let's make it what this is. Okay, so let's go and apply that to the root of our Arc directory. Okay, we are there. Run it. Config default created. Okay, not sure what that means, but that's okay. So I'm just going to cat this file. I think it's going to create a deployment, and I want to make my own deployment. So let's cat this. Yeah, it's a deployment. Oh, no. So it is actually, that's actually going to run Arc, the server. Okay, so we definitely need that. Okay, cool. So at this point, we should have Arc installed. Now let's try to use it. Tutorials, disaster recovery. Okay. Using schedules and restore only mode. If you periodically back up your cluster of resources, you're able to return to a previous state in case of some unexpected mishap, such as a service outage. Cool, so you can actually create schedules and stuff. Now this Arc tool, I don't have it, right? So if I go Arc, obviously it's not gonna find it. Probably had to build it or something like that. And if it's done in Go, it's probably like a go get. That's weird. Okay. Oh, install client. Okay. Okay, cool. So let's go download Linux 64-bit. And let's do wget. Okay, now let's untar it. XVFC. Something like that. Yeah, all right. XVZF. Okay, so now let's move the arc binary into our path. Yay, arc is working. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to our getting started guide. Let's create a backup. So we'll create a backup for any object that matches the app nginx thing. Okay, let's just make a backup of everything. In fact, I have nothing running in my cluster right now, so let's go launch something into my cluster. So I have this like thing. It's just one of my demo apps. Okay, so let's deploy a bunch of stuff. Okay, so basically I have like backup, backend service, front-end service, middleware service, and the middleware has two different things. So this should spin up quite quickly. And then if I look at my services, I have some services here. Okay, so let's make a backup of this and then try to spin it up on a new cluster. Okay, so how do I do that? Arc backup create. Let's call it backup 1. Okay. Okay, so let's see if it put anything in this bucket. Nope. Did not. Oh, there it is. Okay, backup 1. So basically, gzipped all of it up. It has a JSON. Okay, cool. So it has some stuff about what it did. Okay, so now let's modify this deployment. So kubectl again, get pods. I also should have some secrets or config maps. Yeah. Anyway, so let's do a scale command. Prod. Okay, so now if I say kubectl get pods, we should have a ton of these front ends running. Let's just have some fun and also scale up our back end, but only to 5. Now I kind of doubt it'll fit on my cluster. Yep, there we go. So we actually don't have enough space on our cluster to run this many containers, which makes sense. But I want to see what Arc will do. So will it keep the ones in the pending state? Let's create backup 2. Oops. Okay, so it does take a little bit of time to show up. Okay, there it is. So that makes sense because Arc has to actually, do all the work once you click whatever. So, and it actually says, backup request submitted successfully. It doesn't, so it does it all asynchronously, which is interesting. Okay, so now we have our backup 1 and backup 2. What I want to do is create a new cluster and then basically install Arc on it and see if we can get back to the state. The first thing I want to test before I do that is see if I can roll back to backup 1. So let's restore from backup. Okay, interesting. So let's do a kubectl get pods. Seems like everything is still running. Let's give it some time though. So it's not deleting these pods. It's not going back to that old state. Obviously, I think what if we delete let's delete delete deployment. Okay, and now let's get pods. Okay, so we can see all the front-end pods are gone. Bunch of stuff in pending still. It should eventually, Kubernetes will eventually reschedule all that stuff onto a node now that it has space. Just the exponential backup will make it time. So let's restore from backup. Now let's do a get pods. Okay, cool. So our front-end pod did come back. So now let's restore from backup 2 and see if it scales it out. No, it is not. It is not scaling it back out. Okay. Interesting. So it's not getting the state of the number of replicas in my system, which I thought it would do. Okay, let's do something a little bit different. Let's also delete that again. Okay, and now let's do backup 2. Now let's see if it has 10. Weird. It's not even doing anything. So, it seems like backup 2 doesn't even work. And if I remember correctly, I ran the same command basically. Yeah, I ran the same commands. So, that is weird. Let's just watch it again just to see. Oh, okay, so we have our front-end pod running. But again, only one copy. So it didn't capture the manual scale command, which is weird. Not sure how it is dealing with those things. Let's make a third backup. So, okay, so now let's not make a third backup. You know what I'll do? if we see this, what I'm curious about is maybe the Arc server just didn't have enough time to like come up to speed on what's happening. So let us actually make a third backup. Okay, so now let's delete the backend service. Okay, so we have our front end. Now let's restore from backup 3. Obviously, this will take some time, as we have seen before. So interesting. So will Arc restore my Kubernetes resources exactly the way they were before? It says yes, with some exceptions. For example, when Arc restores pods, it deletes the node name from the pod so it can be scheduled into a new node. So it should be backing up the number of pods as well. And oh, look, it did. So now it has 5. So it did do it correctly. Okay, so interesting. Let's run the describe command that basically tells us like what's in the backup and see what that gives us. Doesn't really give us much about what's inside of it. I kind of wish that it would tell you like, or maybe let's see what the Arc tool can do. Okay, so it's kind of weird that it didn't pick up the scaled out deployments the first 2 times, but it did pick it up the 3rd time. So that tells me that it does work, but maybe it takes a little bit of time for it to really understand the state of the system. Okay, so let's see. So let's go make a new cluster. And now let's test if we can basically migrate from our old cluster to our new cluster using this backup. And while that's going on, let us also check out if we can restore from the old backup. So let's do a restore from backup 1. And let's see if it deletes those pods. Okay, while this is running, I'm going to go back to documentation. I think probably the most useful part about Arc is not manually running these commands, but setting up the schedule. I saw that in the documentation and it looked really cool. So let's go back to our get starting guide. Not there. Let's go and run on GCP. Not there. I swear I saw a schedule. Okay. Okay, so it's definitely not deleting these, even though if I run that backup by itself. So like, let's say I say kubectl delete deployment backend prod. And then I do a restore. So in this case, I assume it's going to create one container for our backend. So even though in the Arc stuff it is saved as one pod, it's not going to delete pods from that deployment. So it's kind of interesting. Okay, our new cluster is created as well. I can't find where I saw the thing for schedules. Here's the scheduled backup. Where did I see it? Where did I see it? Huh, and our backend. Oh, there it is. Wow, that took a really long time for it to come up. Okay, so if it really took that long, it took almost like a full minute for it to finish the backup. Oh, what's going on? In that case, let's go restore from backup 2. And maybe it just takes a really long time. And maybe I was just not patient enough. Okay, so let's let that run here. Where did I find the schedule? I swear I saw it. I just don't know where. Oh, look, there's a file format, which is cool. So we can maybe look at that as well. Oh, here we go. Disaster recovery. That's where it is in the tutorials, of course. Okay, so it looks like it uses like a cron syntax for the schedules, which makes sense. Okay, and back here, again, only one pod. So maybe I didn't wait long enough. I think that was what it was before. So let's keep waiting here. Waiting for it to finish. In any case, so it uses the schedule command. Nope, not this. So it uses the schedule command to create a schedule. So what we can do is basically create a schedule. I think the backup, every like minute, and then hopefully it'll run. So the first thing I want to do though, before I create the schedule, is to see if I can take this backup and create it on this new cluster. And so I'm going to cancel this command, and let's connect to the new cluster and install Arc real fast. Okay. Now we had to do the steps to install Arc. So the first thing to do is create our cluster role binding. And then I think let's go back to our install on GCP thing. We can skip most of this stuff, which is nice. we got to create the secret again, and we got to create the deployments. So let's go back to our Arc directory. And let's run those YAMLs. Prereqs. Great. Now let's create the secret. Okay. And finally, let's run, again, go back to the Arc directory, and let's run those two deployment commands. So we have the Arc config. And then we have our deployment. Okay. So Arc is now still set up to use that same the same bucket. Everything is still the same. So what we should be able to do now is just basically restore from that backup. Which is found. So let's look at backup 3. Okay, so see how long this takes. And while that's going on, let's actually go to our old one, and we can actually go into the Kubernetes dashboard right here built into GKE. And we can see that, no, it's still just one. So it's doing some weird things if you're doing a restore and that deployment still exists. It doesn't seem that it scales it up or something. I'm really not sure. Maybe it just didn't back it up correctly. Not sure. Okay, so let's go to our new cluster. Oh, look at that. It's up. Am I in the right cluster? Let's see. New cluster. Workloads. Oh, here we go. Oh, there we go. I was in the wrong cluster. Cool. Okay, so it takes quite a while for it to come back up. It kind of makes sense. It has to download it from the bucket, unzip it, do all that stuff. So it's not going to be instantaneous. Let's refresh it here. Cool. Everything. Weird. Oh, this is both my clusters. That's why. So let's go cluster equals new cluster, just so we can point down. Okay, cool. So not sure why this isn't paused. I don't even know what that means. That's really weird. Let's restore from backup 1 and see what happens. I also expected backup 3 to make 5 copies of the backend. Kind of weird that it didn't. I also expected to make 5 copies of the front end. It's not even making a single copy of the backend show up. Okay. Let's go to deployments. So we do have a backend prod deployment, but it says the desired state is 0, which is totally wrong. I wanted something like 5. Let's delete all the, let's delete this deployment. So kubectl delete deployment, keep running this command, backend prod. And let's restore from our backup 3 again, just to see what happens. And we know it takes some time. I wonder if there's a way to get status from Arc. What is rustic? I don't even know. It looks cool though. Weird. Okay. Let's just try the backup thing. Let's just see if that works. Unfortunately, it seems like the backup restore didn't work the way I expected it to. It was kind of flaky. It's very possible I'm doing something wrong, but you know, I just couldn't get it to work properly. So let's run this schedule command. So this will do a daily backup, which is not what we want. We want a minutely backup. So test backup sketch. So let's do this 0, 0. Let's just do cron every minute. Bunch of stars. Perfect. Okay, so arc schedule get. Okay. Last backup 12 seconds ago. So let's go back to our bucket. And we called it Sleep Arc Test Bucket. Okay, so it is doing the backup on a schedule, which is cool. And I assume in a minute it'll do another one. Not too surprised that this works. It makes sense. Now, if the Arc deployment goes down, I assume that this will break. But the chances of that happening are pretty low, as it's a deployment, and Kubernetes will make sure that that pod always stays up. So, not too worried about, you know, this the backup stuff not working. But let's just wait for a minute and then just see what happens. Let's see if it makes another backup. There we go. So it did make another backup. And just to make sure, let's go back here, refresh. There we go. So we have our backups on our schedule. Okay, cool. So in conclusion, I think Arc is a pretty cool concept. It was kind of hard to install. I'm definitely going to be contributing some fixes to their GCP Getting Started guide. It's a few little low-hanging fruit that I think could make it a lot easier. But it was pretty straightforward to install. You kind of install the stuff on the server, and then you download the client tool, and it kind of just works. I was kind of confused on what is in a backup. I really wish there was a way to see what was backed up. I know you can go into the tar file and look at the directory structure and stuff, but I wish there's a way to do that just using the client tool. It didn't work the way I expected it to work, but at the same time it did. There is a lag time between when you run Arc backup create and what it actually knows it's in the cluster. I think for most production use cases, it's probably going to be fast enough. But in my case, it seemed that it didn't capture everything. In fact, let's just go look at what's inside of these files. So, interestingly enough, it has all of the results from doing this. But let's go to our backup one tar.gz and open it up. So in our pods, that's what I really care about. Oops. So it had our pods. Okay, so now let's go to backup 2. Or let's go to backup 2. Yep. So this one should have 10 and 10. And I'm sorry for the small font. Really can't do anything much about that. So it did have 10 and 10. Okay, so it seems like it is doing the right thing, and it's actually creating the backups correctly. But the restore process isn't working for some reason. That's really weird. Okay, so I'm gonna try out one last thing before. So delete everything. Interesting, the deployment was there. Taking a little bit of time. Okay. Should have nothing. Let's restore from that backup again. Now let's get deployments. Again, it takes a little bit of time, as we know. Taking quite a while, and oh, there we go. That is weird. It says desired 0, right? So maybe if I run a scale command. That should have been almost instantaneous. So there's something really wacky going on. There's something wacky going on. Something weird. Again, not sure what's going on. Anyway, so yeah, I think Arc, the idea is really cool, especially the scheduled backups. I think there's really nothing else like that for Kubernetes today. It didn't really work perfectly. Again, it's not even on version 1 yet. It's still being built. I'm definitely going to try it again in the future once it's more mature. Honestly, I don't have a very pressing use case for it right now. But I do recommend, backing up your Kubernetes clusters. I think Arc is a really good tool to do that if you need to do it. Now, of course, like I said in the beginning of the video, if you're checking everything into Git and things like that, that can be good enough for most people, or Helm, That can be good enough for a lot of people, especially if you're using like Git tags to maybe like tag a build number or something like that. But again, if you have multiple microservices, it becomes really hard to kind of coordinate between teams. So Arc, the whole idea was to take a snapshot of it. And it does work, there's some funkiness involved. So if you like this video, give it a like, subscribe for more. Again, let me know what you want me to test out. I have some ideas of my own, but I'm always interested to hear what y'all want. With that, I'll see you on the next episode of Testing Out Tools.